Okay, hey everybody. This is for assignment number 8, part 1. What we're going to talk about in this assignment is why the PPP was a useful intervention for not only the United States as a whole, but for individual businesses, individual families, local states, things like that. One of the things that we're going to talk about, I want to kind of preface this with, like we talked about a political consultant, kind of talking to a presidential candidate about how they might frame some of these things to the public. So we'll get started here. One of the first things I want to point out is this chart that you see in front of you is the sum of jobs by state. So what I want to point out here on this first chart is that on the eve of the COVID-19 crisis, the United States was home to 30 million small businesses. That's a lot of businesses. And again, small here being businesses under 500 employees. Even the massive 600 billion plus of the Paycheck Protection Program could only help a small percentage of that. And I think we all intuitively know that not everybody's going to be able to be helped. A perfectly equitable allocation would have offered a mere $20,000 to each, hardly enough to make a difference to any firm with a payroll to protect. So I'll give you an example. We're all about equity here in the United States, and I think we all understand that we open the application process, and if you got to it, you got to it, and funding ran out pretty quick. We all understand that a lot of applications flowed in very, very quickly. Like we're saying here, if we'd given it out equitably, it would only been $20,000. Now, for a really small business that makes maybe $400,000 a year, that's helpful. That has a low payroll. But if you're a larger business that has 490 employees, that's not going to be helpful at all. And so the idea that they didn't give it out equitably is very useful. What we want to see here is the number of jobs. So, obviously the states with bigger PPP money went to them, have more people in those states. So California, almost 4 million employees reported under this Paycheck Protection Program that were affected by this. Now, what we want to think about is we want to break this down into families, right? So not just 4 million statistics or data points that were affected, but this is 4 million people that continue to receive money in their pockets. So the idea that the Paycheck Protection Program was helpful is, I think, pretty intuitive to people. If you have a job and you're working through this pandemic and still receiving money, and you're going out into the community, well, out is relative during the pandemic, but you're spending money online, you're getting food ordered in, you're going to the grocery store, money is still being used. And this, it kept workers with money in their pockets. And again, these aren't data points. So we can think of these 4 million people just in California that continued to have money in their pockets when they wouldn't otherwise. And I think that's really important to look at. Texas, you look at 2.6 million people in Texas. New York, 2.1 million. You go over to South Dakota, not as many. South Dakota, 102,000 employees in South Dakota. It was a useful intervention because every single one of these people would have been affected negatively. They would have lost money. More people would have been unemployed. Now, there were a lot of people that filed for unemployment during that time, unemployment insurance during that time, because they were laid off. But that number would have been through the roof had we not had this intervention. So this intervention was truly, truly valuable. Next one we want to look at is just this chloropleth map with the sum of jobs by state. Again, just a different representation of the same thing we were looking at. California obviously had the most protected jobs, 4 million. New York, Florida had 1.9 million, roughly. So what I want us to focus on is how valuable this is on a micro level for families. You look at 2 million families in Florida, 2.6 million in Texas, 4 million in California, even in Wyoming, 56,000 families. That's a lot of families. What I want us to point out here and think about is that this money that was given out kept these families going. It kept food on their table. We all know we saw the food bank lines at different places. One of the things that we really need to focus on is how quickly this came about, right? The were building the plane as they were flying it, so to speak. And that takes a lot of innovation. And we were able to do that. We were successful in that. So, I really want us to focus on that. This next chart, what I want us to look at is by industry type, right? So corporations received $182 billion. Next in line was the LLCs. The LLCs received $107 billion. And then next came S corporation. So different type of corporation, just a different heading under subsection of corporations. $87 billion went to those. And then look at nonprofits. $36 billion went to nonprofits. So the services that nonprofits employ to communities is invaluable. And so $36 billion is a lot of money that went to those nonprofits. You look at joint ventures, much lower here with 65 million, still a lot of money. Self-employed, 292 million. So a lot of different industries and a lot of different funds that went to those. This chart here is representative. What we're going to look at is loan range by state in a bar graph. So average loan sizes, the number of loans also suggests that most of the money did go to small businesses. A lot of people were frustrated because they felt like the bigger businesses got most of the money and swept it up quickly. But if we look at the data suggests that the initial $342 billion that was dispersed in that first wave was dispersed to 1.7 million borrowers with an average loan of 206,000, which doesn't indicate a huge business. You look at the LA Lakers, for example, they received the money initially, but they gave the money back because they realized that they didn't fit the criteria of a small business. So that money went back into the pool for the businesses that really did need it. What we want to look at here is just, California got 58 billion, New York got 33, Texas got 34, South Dakota is over here with 1.2 billion. And then, up and down from there. And then our chloropleth map that explains the loan range by state. Same thing, looking at it in a different context. Wyoming received $795 million that protected those 56,000 employees. So if you were to run those numbers, that 795 million went to protect 56,000 families. And that's a lot for those families. Again, we want to focus on the micro level here. What was being done at the grassroots? And how did businesses continue to operate and continue to keep our GDP up during a time where economic output wasn't as high, and this increased our capacity to continue operating as a country. So the total jobs. Now this is really interesting. Let's make note of this. So the total jobs that were reported were 31 million jobs were affected by this. And so when we think about jobs, we don't just think about jobs themselves. We think about families that are connected to those jobs, kids that are being provided for, households that are being held afloat, mortgages that are continuing to being paid. Now, the lower interest rates during this time and the more home buying that's going on because of those lower interest rates affects each one of those 31 million people that had those jobs, and countless number of other families that were affected because of those. What we want to talk about here too is that before the PPP applications were even accessible, before they even went out and were able to be sent in, lawmakers implied that banks might deplete the almost $50 billion in loans without helping every eligible business owner. One of the critiques of this has been that not everybody received the funds. Of course, not everybody received the funds. Not everybody acted quickly enough, and not everyone should have received the funds. People that acted quickly were put in line the way it was first come, first served, and they were able to be served. I think everybody knows as soon as it opened up and how quickly all these applications came in, there was no way that everybody was going to be served. So if we look at the data, as of 2018, there were 30 million small businesses in the United States. And applicants could request up to 250% of their current payroll, which everybody knew the funding was going to run out, right? And so they even did two separate waves of this, where they released funds that was depleted, and then they put more funds, and so more people got to go get some money, which I would say was a very useful thing that they went ahead and made that second injection of funds in there to make sure that some of those people that didn't get in there quick enough got some in the second wave. Um, One of the things we want to take note here is that just after several days after the release of the applications, Bank of America got 177,000 applications for 32.6 billion in funding. 10% of the entire program just went through Bank of America, and they weren't even the largest. JP Chase Morgan was the largest, but Bank of America had 177,000 applications in a very short time span, and 32 billion in funding. So a lot was going on, and I think this just really points to American innovation and the way that we were able to, again, build this plane as it was flying, and do something to keep our economy afloat that nobody's ever done before. What I want us to look at here again is by industry. So what we need to take note of is it launched in early April as part of the $2 trillion CARES Act, so which is larger subset of the PPP. It was intended to help firms with 500 or fewer employees, and it was originally funded right around that $350 billion. The money included aid for larger restaurants and hotel chains, presumably because they have been especially hard hit by the coronavirus emergency and because they employ millions of people. Placed under the Small Business Administration, the PPP offered aid through loans on attractive terms that promised forgiveness as the borrowers' funds were used predominantly to support payrolls or rehire workers laid off during the emergency. What we need to point out here is that not all jobs were covered by unemployment insurance. So unemployment rates went up, unemployment claims went up, but not in a equitable ratio. So, for limited liability corporations, the jobs reported for under those limited liability, it was 8 million jobs in LLCs. In S corporations, 5 million. In corporations, it was 12 million people. In nonprofits, it's 3 million people. Gets them down to some of these lower bubbles: independent contractors, joint ventures, and trusts. And you see self-employed individuals, 18,000. So just wanted to notice how successful this was for keeping all of these people employed, for keeping money in their pockets, for keeping the economy moving forward. Again, our GDP would be in a different place if it wasn't for this intervention. Our country would be in a different place if it wasn't for this intervention. And I think we can all surmise that this was a successful intervention and will continue to be molded and shaped as we move down the road. And we're going to offer promising forgiveness to companies that meet that criteria. And it's not going to be hard to meet that criteria. We're going to make sure that companies are able to easily have their loans forgiven and continue to operate, because our country works around small business, and small business is integral to our country. So thank you for your time today. And I do feel that after watching this, you'll be able to agree with me that this Paycheck Protection Program was a very useful intervention. Thank you.